It is the country's oldest and main state-run news agency.
Our journalists delivered the first report that Kazakhstan had gained independence.
Just like the coat of arms and the national anthem, I believe the news agency is also a symbol of our country. Without Kazinform, this task could not have been accomplished. The information was difficult to deliver, and it carried serious responsibility. Even through the ideological filter of that time, such materials still slipped through. You could read the story in those photos. Each Kazakh image spoke for itself. The Kazakh Kazinform brand became a guarantee of quality, credibility, and professionalism.
Kazrosta, Kaztag, Kazinform is the first and foremost news agency in the history of Kazakhstan. At different times, it bore different names, but its mission has always remained the same: to provide coverage of government policy and to inform the public about the most important news. It has always worked with clarity, precision, and reliability. These principles became the foundation of its success. Time changed, and the agency changed as well. What did not change were the high standards of professionalism, the sense of responsibility, and the commitment to the life of the entire nation and its citizens. Indeed, the history of the Kazinform agency is the history of the nation. It is reflected in faces and in events, in facts and in figures, in everything that we call life. For 105 years, Kazinform has been the constant and impartial chronicler of our people and our country. It was the journalists, the editors, the correspondents, and the photographers who carried out this mission. Those who stood behind the reports and the photographs that required no comment. Together with the nation, they lived through its rises and its falls, its tragedies and its moments of joy. The origins of the first telegraph agency in what is now Kazakhstan date back to the early 1920s. On the 13th of August 1920 in Orenburg, then the capital of the Kyrgyz province, the Orenburg-Turgay branch of the Russian telegraph agency, Rosta, was established. Rosta was the central telegraph information agency of the Soviet Union, which would later become known as TASS.
As the phrase went, TASS is authorized to declare. We were part of TASS Kazakh, which served as a sole channel for official announcements. At that time, messages arrived. First of all, the decrees that came from Moscow. Later, they would also pass along descriptions of one propaganda poster or another.
The upheavals of that era, when Kazrosta's telegraph service was taking shape, left a profound and lasting mark on the nature of its work. In the years of revolution, civil war, and the consolidation of Soviet power, this instrument of mass communication became the primary voice of Bolshevik policy. Its mission was not only to report events, but to mold public opinion. Satirical posters and forceful propaganda slogans became central tools in this ideological campaign. In Moscow, the effort drew upon the talents of prominent poets of the time, among them Vladimir Mayakovsky and Demyan Bedny. In the republics, however, the choice of contributors was far more limited. The people who worked there were only slightly educated. That was the reality of the time. They were brought in not so much for professional skills as for literacy and commitment to the cause. There was nothing like the professional selection that exists today. Kalamkaz Abuova, a veteran of Kazinform, devoted nearly 30 years of her life to the agency. Over the course of her career, she trained more than one generation of professional correspondents. Now, on the occasion of the agency's 105th anniversary, she is conducting an extensive research project to reconstruct the history of Kazinform, piecing together material from archives in Kazakhstan and Russia. Yet it turned out that almost no record had been preserved of the agency that had chronicled a century of the nation's history. What remains is little more than fragmentary data and a handful of names of those who stood at the origins of Kazakh. The revolution in Russia demonstrated that whoever controls information controls power. The strategic importance of the post and telegraph had already become clear in Petrograd in 1917. The Bolsheviks attached special significance to controlling the press and those who worked within it. Abuova's research revealed that after the famine and during the mass political repressions of 1937, 5 chief editors of Kazakh were arrested.
Это связано с тем, что основные задания, которые поручения давали, это было немыслимые.
The assignments of that time were often impossible to accept, not just distortions of the truth, but demands completely divorced from reality. Many who came into the newsroom had backgrounds in the most ordinary trades. They were not accustomed to deception. They could not bring themselves to act against their conscience, even if it meant protecting their own lives. Work in the sphere of information and ideology was always fraught with risk that grew under a totalitarian regime. For Kazakh's team, the challenge was even greater because Kazakhstan was a union republic within the Soviet Union. As one writer observed, to praise the steppe without diminishing the mountains was never simple. Even a single incautious report could stir resentment in Moscow. The agency had to balance its own responsibilities with the demands of the authorities in Moscow.
Внимание! Говорит Москва. Передаем важное правительственное сообщение.
Attention, this is Moscow speaking. We're delivering an important government announcement. Today, at 4 o'clock in the morning, without any declaration of war, German armed forces attacked the borders of the Soviet Union.
The war, those harrowing pages of our history, live on not only in the memories of its witnesses, but also thanks to the courageous photojournalists of the agency. On the front lines, they risked their lives to capture the faces of the nation's defenders: Manshuk Mametova, Baurjan Momushula, Talgat Bigildinov, Rahimjan Koshkarbayev, and countless other heroes, both known and unknown. Equally compelling is the series of photographs taken in the rear of women, children, and the elderly giving their last strength for the front, standing day and night at the machines.
Kazakh had an outstanding photo service. Its photographs were published in newspapers, and the agency kept an excellent archive. Back then the photographs were still in black and white, but they were of remarkable quality, vivid and expressive. Looking at a Kazakh photograph, you could grasp the story it was telling.
The opening of a railway station, the construction of Turksib, the first Congress of Writers, Jansugurov, Seyfulin, Mailin, Kalebek Qanishbayev. Elections to the Supreme Soviet, Sheker Yermagambetova, the chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, Ondasynov, the party secretary Shaykhmetov, War and Peace, Baisitova and Jambul, Dina Nurpiisova, Shaken Aymanov as Aldar Kose, the beauty Shara Zhienkulova, the young Suleimenov and Baglanova, Margulan at work, and horseback basketball, the Aral Sea still full and navigable, the Bukhtarma Reservoir still dry, a giant beluga no longer seen today, the central stadium rising in Almaty, the first free rallies, and now in color, the radiant Bibigul Tulegenova, Serik Konakbayev before the Olympics, the Pope in Astana, Tokayev, Macron, and the Kazakh Tazı hounds. The photo archive of Kazinform reflects every sphere of Kazakhstan's life: industry and agriculture, education and science, medicine, culture, sport, the achievements of the national economy, the labor frontrunners, the party congresses and the rallies. All were an inseparable part of the spirit of the time.
Редакция агентства держала руку на пульсе огромной страны.
The agency's newsroom kept close watch over the life of the vast country, Jambul, Kızılarda. From every corner of the republic, information converged here. This was Kazakh's communications hub, staffed by dedicated employees, most of them women. The team was once awarded first place in a socialist competition, and the banner still hangs on the wall. After reports were received, processed, coordinated, and confirmed, they were sent out again to the regions, carrying both the government's official statements and Kazakh's own news. Yet the greatest value for us today lies in the everyday stories captured by the agency's correspondents, where the protagonists were not only stars and statesmen, but ordinary people. Behind every photograph was a human destiny, a life devoted to selfless work for the good of the country. These are the faces of real people, and they are the true faces of that era.
We were engaged not only in propaganda, we also did ordinary journalistic work of our own. And some of those stories even slipped through the ideological filter of the time. For the most part, of course, the content was propagandistic, more still produced, bigger harvests gathered, workers showing their support, and so on and so forth. But there were also ordinary stories, very human tales.
Murat Buldikbayev joined Kazakh when he was just 17. He worked during Konaev's era and remembers that the agency always held a special place. Its reports not only set the agenda within the republic, but also carried its voice to the Union as a whole. This is why every word was treated as if it were gold, for it was the correspondents of Kazakh who helped shape the image of Kazakhstan.
There was a need to make Kazakhstan stand out among the other republics. The leadership of the time decided that the harvest would not be reported in tons, but in puds. That way the figure came to nearly a billion. A billion puds, it sounded impressive. Yet a pud is only 16 kilograms. In reality, it amounted to about 16 million tons, which did not sound nearly as grand. But a billion puds had resonance. And Konaev was pleased to hear it. It gave the Kazakh SSR a distinct presence. And to make that presence felt, the right atmosphere had to be created, which was exactly what we provided.
The staff determined everything. The phrase, once pronounced by Stalin, became a byword across the Soviet Union, and with good reason. At Kazakh, this was fully understood. The agency was always staffed by the very best, from correspondents in the field to its senior editors. Many of their names are remembered to this day.
В Кастаге в основном работала элита нашей отечественной журналистики. Все новости официальные на государственном уровне.
Kazakh was where the elite of national journalism worked. The agency occupied a unique position. Every piece of official news at the state level was first issued through Kazakh. Only after it appeared on Kazakh did our newspapers pick it up and reprint it.
Өте сауатты адамдар жұмыс істеді. Соның арқасында қазақ тілінің
At Kazakh, it was highly educated professionals who shaped the work. And through their efforts, the Kazakh language began to take on an official character. In the years of independence, this development gained new strength, helping to establish Kazakh as both the official and the state language.
бір есімде бар, қазақ әдебиетінде болу керек, біздің классик заңғар жазушымыз Ғабит Мүсірепов қазақтың тілі.
I recall the great writer Gabit Musrepov once warned that the language of Kazakh was becoming the language of the Kazakhs. In part, he feared that the rich poetic beauty of Kazakh literature was being reduced to the terse and concise style of news reporting. Yet he acknowledged the great benefit this brought. It helped secure the Kazakh language across every sphere of life and played a vital role in the formation of official documents.
жақсы көмек жасады деп айтуға болады.
Я лично застал таких руководителей Казтага, как
I had the privilege of working with remarkable figures at Kazakh, Kakimjan Kazabayev, who went on to serve as secretary of the Central Committee for Ideology, the accomplished translator Jumagali Ismagulov, my own superior in Central Committee Amangildi Ahmetaliyev, the distinguished journalist and publicist Gadalbek Shalahmetov, and many others. Kazakh, later Kazinform, came to stand as a mark of quality, credibility and professionalism.
Гарантом качества, достоверности и профессионализма.
Kazakh's professionalism was acknowledged at the highest levels. It was through the agency that the first ever radio bridge between the Soviet Union and the United States was established. It was an unprecedented exchange that opened direct dialogue between the world's two superpowers. The broadcast became a landmark event, heralding the Khrushchev thaw and the first cracks of the Iron Curtain. For the first time, audiences on both sides could learn more about each other without censorship.
Советская точка радиомоста была в Казахстане.
The Soviet side of the radio bridge was based in Almaty, Kazakhstan, while the American side was in Hollywood. It was the first exchange of its kind. The Soviet broadcast itself was organized by Kazakh.
The world could no longer remain the same. It was changing with remarkable speed. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union. A proponent of democracy and freedom of speech, he announced perestroika, glasnost, and a pluralism of opinion. It seemed for a moment that there was light at the end of the tunnel. But in 1986, Almaty was shaken by the December events. Young people took to the square to stage a peaceful protest against a change in the republic's leadership. The demonstration was brutally suppressed. Murat Buldikbayev witnessed those tragic events firsthand as a Kazakh correspondent.
Мы передавали очень большое количество информации со Старой площади оттуда.
We were sending back constant reports from the old square. I was there. I happened to be younger than most of my colleagues, and I spoke Kazakh, which meant I could follow what the students were saying, how they were speaking among themselves, and how officials, from the prosecutor to Nazarbayev, addressed them. Then, just before the crowd was broken up, I was suddenly called back. I left the square. We delivered a huge volume of information, yet in the end only a few lines ever appeared, perhaps 40 words in total. Still, what we reported was honest and truthful, and what was cut or reshaped in Moscow was no longer something we could influence.
It was the events in Almaty in 1986 that gave rise to the Gorbachev dilemma. Those at the top could not govern as before, and those at the bottom no longer wished to live as before.
Только в 1985 году объявили перестройку, гласность, плюрализм мнений, но в 1986 году...
In 1985, perestroika, glasnost, and pluralism of opinion were announced. And a year later came the December events. The authorities tried to suppress this information, yet it still leaked into the Western media. And the very first report came from Kazakh. An American political scientist later cited that report as an example of the Gorbachev dilemma, when it was no longer possible to govern in the old way, but not yet possible to govern in a new one.
Despite the Soviet Union's policy of glasnost and freedom of speech, the leadership did everything to hide the truth about what had taken place. Instead of openness, repression and persecution returned. Even Kazakh was caught in this renewed clampdown. During the closed trial of the so-called instigators of the December events, the agency correspondents captured a photograph of the defendants.
These are the photographs for which I was dismissed. Here are the judges and the defendants. Unfortunately, the KGB seized all of my negatives, leaving me with reproductions.
For 50 years, Kazakh photojournalist Yuri Becker has been capturing the history of Kazakhstan through photography. Those bleak December days of 1986, he too stood on the square, and decades later, he recalls everything that unfolded in Almaty.
Нас, группу фотокорреспондентов, четверых, Будневич, я, Зинин и Попов, отправили на площадь.
4 of us was sent to the square, Budnevich, Zimin, Popov and myself. We split into pairs. Budnevich and I positioned ourselves at the corner of Furmanov and Satpaev, while Zimin and Popov stood on Mira Street. Almost at once they were stopped. Their cameras were confiscated, their film destroyed, and they were forced to leave. Thanks to Bednevich's authority, no one touched our equipment. A great coat was thrown over my shoulders, and I went on taking photographs of everything unfolding before my eyes. Those images became part of the nation's history.
Yuri Becker himself became part of history, of Kazinform, and of the nation. In the aftermath of the peaceful protest that was violently dispersed, he was the only one granted access to the closed trial of its defendants. Even Kazakh's own correspondent was left outside in the hallway, Becker recalls. His admission came only because he carried credentials from the Soviet Telegraph Agency in Moscow.
Фотохроника ТАСС нам дали задание снимать этот процесс судебный.
We were assigned by TASS Photo Chronicle to cover the trial. Our work was never only for Almaty or even Kazakhstan. We reported for the entire Soviet Union and beyond its borders as well. I remember sending those photographs straight to Moscow, transmitting them by phototelegraph to TASS. The next morning I received a note of thanks for the speed and quality of the coverage. But a day later, my picture was on the cover of the German magazine Bild, under the headline, "Democracy in Kazakhstan." From there, the images spread across the international press, presented as proof that democracy had arrived in Kazakhstan. Abroad, the reaction was largely positive. At home, however, under the leadership we had then, the reception was far less welcoming.
This is the photograph. It shows the defendants as the verdict was delivered. Yertai Kopizbayev, Togilbay Tashenov, Jambul Tayjumayev, Kairat Raskulbekov, who was sentenced to death, and Kairgilde Kozimbayev. The image spread quickly through the world's press and provoked a storm of reaction. Nowhere was the response sharper than in Kazakhstan itself. The leadership of the republic was outraged by the way Kazakh photojournalist Yuri Becker had portrayed the young men. To the international press, they did not appear as rebels or rioters. They appeared as young men facing judgment with their heads held high, proud and unbowed. The judge, by contrast, seemed hesitant and uneasy as he read the sentence. It was an image the leadership could not accept.
Вроде бы обычный материал в плане государственной политики, но
It seemed at first like an ordinary report, fully in line with state policy. Yet the photograph itself provoked the anger of the republic's leadership. The problem was that the image of the four young men did not stir pity as intended. It stirred pride. To readers, they appeared proud, and they inspired feelings very different from those the authorities had expected. The reaction was strong.
на которые были рассчитаны эти материалы того периода, был большой резонанс.
The furious leadership of the republic spared no one. At the time, Saudbek Abdrahmanov was working in the press department of the Central Committee, directly responsible for covering those events. Looking back now, he recalls that everyone was punished, from the agency's top executives down to its staff.
Пострадал очень сильно Жумагали Исмагулов, директор Кастага. Он был уволен с работы и исключен из партии.
Zhumagaliyev Smagulov, Kazakh's director, bore the harshest punishment. He was dismissed from his post and expelled from the party. Those who had prepared the material were also targeted. Even now revered mentor, Mamadyar Jakub, was punished after publishing the photograph in Jetesu. Yet the image had already spoken louder than any official decree.
Фото сделало свое дело. После публикации на страницах казахстанской печати, в перепечатке.
Once it appeared in Kazakhstan's press, it was picked up abroad, and everywhere it landed, the same conclusion was drawn. Gorbachev's promise of glasnost was crumbling and exposed as censorship in disguise.
Дело сходится со словами «на деле гласность», на самом деле запрет информации.
In 1991, Kazakhstan declared its independence. Few remember that it was Kazakh's news service that first carried the announcement and delivered the historic message to the nation.
наши парламентские журналисты принесли первыми весть о том, что Казахстан получил...
It was our parliamentary correspondents who were the first to bring the news that Kazakhstan had achieved independence. For all of us, that announcement was a moment of immense joy and pride. For nearly 25 years, she worked within this stately historic building at the very heart of Almaty. Valentina Yesimbekova devoted the best years of her life to Kazakh. As the agency's long-serving head of its correspondent network, she carried the responsibility of linking the central newsroom with every regional bureau across the republic. It was demanding, yet interesting work. When she recalls the early years of Kazakhstan's independence, she speaks with particular emotion. It was a unique moment, and those within Kazakh felt its weight more than anyone.
90-е годы – это время независимости. Тут, конечно, все было направлено на...
The 1990s were the first crucial years of independence. The republic was focused on building its own laws and institutions. Questions of borders and sovereignty had to be resolved.
Наши корреспонденты, Мурат Бульдикбаев, например, Айгуль Аспандиярова,
Our correspondents, Murat Buldikbayev and Aygul Aspandiarova, followed the debates closely, from the choice of the national flag and coat of arms to the naming of the new currency. It was a time when every detail mattered, and no moment could be missed in laying the foundations of a sovereign state.
Нельзя было упустить ни одного момента строительства независимого государства.
When Tokhtar Bakirov went into space, we all traveled to Star City to cover the event. Years later, when Musabayev made his flight, we went there again. We recorded every detail. It was a moment of pride. For the first time, a Kazakh was flying into space. For us, as young journalists, it showed what new horizons were opening before our republic.
With independence came not only new opportunities, but also severe trials. The country was plunged into crisis. In the most difficult circumstances, a new political system had to be built from the ground up, while the transition to a market economy demanded sweeping reforms of the law. The machinery of state worked relentlessly, producing draft after draft of new legislation, decrees, and decisions from government, parliament, and the president, measures that reshaped the lives of millions of Kazakh citizens. All of it had to be reported, explained, and made clear to the people.
В 1997 году в июне был принят закон, по сути, была начата новая...
In June 1997, Kazakhstan launched a new pension reform. The law was adopted that same month. In the lead-up, members of parliament, representatives of the working group that drafted the reform, and government officials had traveled across the country explaining its provisions. But of course, it was impossible to meet with every single citizen, and yet everyone needed to understand.
До сведений населения нужно было информировать, но нужна была организация, которая это делает.
There was always an enormous volume of information that had to be conveyed to the public, and that required an organization capable of conveying information professionally, day after day. Even now, as I give this interview, I realize how lightly we sometimes took that process. We would invite journalists, share the key points, and rarely think about what happened afterward, or how the information reached people in the end. But looking back, it is clear an immense amount of work was done to make sure the people of Kazakhstan were informed.
Это была проведена очень большая работа.
Bolat Jamishev was at the very center of these historic reforms. A new country had appeared on the world map, and governments, major investors, and international organizations needed to understand what course it would take, both politically and economically. Sensitive questions of both domestic and foreign policy loomed large, shaping how the world viewed Kazakhstan and what it expected of the young republic.
В 1997 году был принят закон о языках, для того, чтобы этот стал закон таким объединяющим.
In 1997, Kazakhstan adopted the law on languages. For it to unite rather than divide, the policy had to be explained clearly to the public. people needed to understand how the country would shape its language policy, how the Kazakh language would be strengthened, while also respecting Kazakhstan's multilingual reality.
Которая ставилась по развитию государственного языка и вообще многоязычия в нашей стране.
Мы должны именно отражать именно политику.
Our role was to reflect the policy of our country, its foreign relations as well as its domestic wars, all aimed at strengthening the nation itself.
Kazakhstan began its independent journey as an open and peace-seeking nation, committed to stability, progress, and active engagement with the international community. Its renunciation of nuclear weapons, its pursuit of inter-ethnic harmony, democracy, and freedom of speech, these messages were carried in no small part by the country's leading news agency. In 1997, one of the landmark announcements that echoed around the world was Kazakhstan's decision to move its capital from Almaty to Akmola. A new capital emerged, a new city, Astana. Today, 3 decades later, it feels as if its grandeur, scale, and success have always been part of the country's story. Yet at the time, leaving the warmth and comfort of Almaty was a real test for all who had to make the move. The team of the Kazinform news agency was no exception. Murat Arenov was the director of the agency during that period. Today, he recalls those years with a smile, though at the time, there was little to laugh about. Astana was not ready to receive so many ministries and institutions. Even the government and parliament struggled to find space. Kazinform was forced to crowd into a single room inside the offices of Yegemen Kazakhstan newspaper.
The move to Astana was far from simple. At the time, the city was nothing like it's today. Only those who believed in the agency's future went. They were dedicated, seasoned professionals, devoted to their work. We moved to Astana. We upheld the Kazakh banner. It did not falter.
The crisis of the 1990s swept across every republic of the former Soviet Union, and each faced it in its own way. Kazakhstan endured that trial in large part through an idea, the building of a new capital, and with it, new meaning and new horizons gave people faith in a brighter future. The energy of the emerging city inspired them, offering hope amid the hardship. And so they endured. They worked without comforts, but with determination and a sense of purpose.
1998 was perhaps the most difficult year in Kazakhstan's financial history. Every institution was struggling to survive. For us, the situation was especially dire. Salaries were meager, and even those were paid only after delays of 3 or 4 months.
On the eve of its anniversary, Kazinform opens its doors to its veterans. Among them is Marat Manasbayev. He began his career here as a young translator and over the years rose to serve as editor-in-chief and later vice president. Today, from the vantage point of Kazinform's headquarters in the heart of Astana, he recalls the hardships of that earlier era, when the agency made the move to the capital.
У Kazinforma не было ни офиса, ни своего здания.
In those days, Kazinform had no office of its own. There were only a handful of staff doing what they could. Gradually, step by step, the situation began to stabilize. And today, Kazinform stands as the nation's leading news agency, whose reach extends far beyond Kazakhstan.
In the years that followed, Kazakhstan had already become fully integrated into the international system of relations. Yet, new challenges still lay ahead. In every such moment, Kazinform news agency served as a reliable support for both the government and the people. It was the bridge that linked the government and society. The global financial crisis of 2008 shook economies around the world. By then, Kazakhstan was an active participant in the international financial and economic system, and it too was drawn into the turbulence. For ordinary people, falling oil prices or the collapse of banks were distant problems. But when housing projects stopped and construction companies went bankrupt, the impact was immediate. Tens of thousands of Kazakh citizens were
left without money and without homes, and many families found themselves on the brink. At that critical moment, it was essential to provide the public with timely information on the government's anti-crisis measures. Above all, that information had to be clear and accessible. The task of delivering it fell to Kazinform.
Люди не то что ждать не хотят, они хотят определенности. Они хотят знать, когда, что.
What people wanted was clarity, to know what had been done and when they would finally move into their homes. Without Kazinform, that message could not have been delivered. This was not just news to be reported. It was information for which someone had to be accountable. Information is responsibility. How it is delivered determines how it is received, with objectivity or colored by emotion.
Askar Umarov knows the weight of information and responsibility more than most. He was at the helm of Kazinform at a time when the world and Kazakhstan was shaken by yet another global trial, the coronavirus pandemic. Lockdowns, vaccinations, we all remember what it was like. Millions of people around the world lost their lives. Families lost their breadwinners. Many were left without work and without any means of income. Against the backdrop of mounting anxiety, financial hardship only deepened the sense of social strain. But the most important thing was not to lose communication. The government and society needed to speak to each other and to hear one another. In that moment, Kazinform once again became the stabilizing link. The government of Kazakhstan announced financial assistance for its citizens, yet in practice, it fell to Kazinform not only to deliver the news of this support, but almost to deliver the support itself, even though that was far beyond its formal duties. And still, it fulfilled the mission because the people needed clarity, trust, and reassurance at the moment of uncertainty.
Помните 42 500? 42 500, когда вот объявили вот эту помощь.
Do you remember the 42,500? That was the emergency allowance. 42,500 tenge in state support announced during the pandemic. It was Kazinform that first explained how people could actually claim it, publishing step-by-step instructions with visuals. Google's algorithms picked it up so effectively that when people typed 42,500 into the search bar, the first result wasn't the Ministry of Labor or the Ministry of Finance. It was Kazinform. Our newsroom phones rang off the hook. We had to turn several staff members into a kind of call center, guiding people through the process.
Kazinform is not just a mirror of our life, it is part of it, responding with immediacy and engagement. The agency's newsroom doesn't merely report what happens, it takes part in the life of society and the nation.
Все сферы жизни мы должны отражать, в общем-то. Но при этом
we had to cover every aspect of life in our reporting, always in line with the policies of the president and the government. That is why I believe the agency's role is crucial, and it must be reinforced. It is a good thing that today it operates under the wing of the country's presidential television and radio complex. The status matters. It gives the agency much greater reach and influence. In any case, the role of the news agency is immense.
Кешегі бір қиын кезеңдерде жабылып, журналистердің жағдайы да төмен.
In those difficult years when the agency was under strain and its journalists were struggling, the decision to bring Kazinform under the presidential television and radio complex proved to be a wise one. It gave Kazinform the status and support of a national institution, firmly backed by the government.
In 2022, Kazinform turned a page and entered a new era. Brought under the umbrella of the presidential television and radio complex, the agency held fast to its historic mission while gaining fresh momentum and global reach. Today, its correspondents report from Russia and China, Turkey and the United States, from across Central Asia, the Middle East and Europe. No other Kazakh news agency maintains such a presence abroad, one that allows the country to speak to the world on equal footing. Kazinform publishes news in Kazakh, Russian, English, Chinese, and Uzbek, and from millions of Kazakhs abroad, also in Latin script and in Arabic script. Today, the agency has fully embraced the digital age, using Instagram, Telegram, Facebook, and YouTube to connect directly with its audience.
Kazinform does not chase hype in any way, yet its following on social media has not only held steady, it continues to grow. The public's demand today is not for flashy or official rhetoric, but for clear and carefully verified reporting. Reliable information is, by definition, information that is checked, credible, and responsibly presented, where the author stands behind every word.
бұрын бір ғана ресми сипаты болатын болса, ақпарат агенттігінің.
In the past, the agency's work had a strictly official character. Today, its scope is wider. It covers a broad range of subjects, publishes stories, produces broadcasts, conducts interviews. Most importantly, the pressing issues of the country's development are reported consistently and systematically.
In 2024, Kazinform's English-language team opened fresh social media channels with original multimedia content for audiences around the world. That same year saw the launch of Bizden Orta, a podcast in Kazakh and Russian to debate politics, the economy, and society. Kazinform has stayed true to its roots, yet it continues to grow with the nation and with the times. Today, it stands as a modern multimedia agency, blending the heritage of Kazakh journalism with global currents, while holding on to what matters most: professionalism, tradition, and the trust of its audience. In the end, that trust is everything, and the news will always be there.